Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everybody. As Mark mentioned, you all are nuts for being here. Mother's Day weekend, talking some numbers. So as Mark alluded to, a lot of our ideas and a lot of what we try to accomplish kind of just comes out of thin air. And this is one of those cases. The think tank, literally, we probably were at dinner or something and we thought, hey, we should talk some numbers one of these weekends, and here we are. So thank you all for coming and making this reality. So yeah, thank you again for traveling on this Mother's Day weekend. I'm going to talk about sustainable profitability. Now, as Mark alluded to in his opening speech, we see tons and tons and tons of data from all different walks of life in dentistry. And me being the numbers guy, I've seen a lot of trends over the past 5 to 6 years. And some of the things we've heard, some things we haven't. But the things that we have heard, I'm going to place real numbers and realistic scenarios around that. I will kind of preface and warn you guys a little bit. We're going to get really deep into the numbers. So I'm going to go slow through it, walk you guys through it. If you have any questions at all, please open forum. Just say, Jake, can you run by that one more time? But again, it's going to be, you're going to get kind of heavy into the numbers here. So just wanted to preface with that. But yeah, so let's, I got to send one more thank you. Ashley, thank you for everything you've done here as well. There's Alistair. What's up, man? Better late than never. Your head is extra shiny.
I was busy being awesome.
Great. All right. Okay, well, let's get started, guys. So, overhead. Now, so we're going to start real basic here. Overhead. What the hell is this, right? Overhead, basically how we define it, is all your variable and fixed cost, your payroll, and doctor pay is not included, including associates. So it's all of your dental supplies, your lab fees, the variable cost there, fixed cost, facility equipment, your, like insurance, and of course payroll fees and taxes, so on forth. So that's how we define overhead, and we place values and we place targets around that, right? So we'll get into that here in a second. So in our program, we look at phase 1, right? So that is to get our overhead to at least 60% or lower, right? The average dental practice in the United States has overhead between 68 and 72%. So we kind of feel that 60% is kind of that first benchmark to reach to get to basically into phase 1 of our program. So this is a breakdown of the overhead, the 30-30-30-10 rule. I think a lot of you have heard this. If you haven't, I'll run through it. That first 30 represents 30% fixed and variable costs, so all cost outside of payroll, right? Everybody understand that? Cool. Then the next 30 is payroll. So your staff salaries, your hygiene, your fringe benefits if you pay out any 401k match or health benefits, and your payroll taxes and fees, your employer taxes and so forth. 30% doctor pay distribution, including your associate. Now this, we always get some like remarks or people not understanding how this works. I'm going to dive deep into how this all works and how it actually plays out in a monthly scenario. So I'm going to explain how 30% is doable from an owner-doctor perspective. And 10% profit. Now this is a loose term as well. We like to leave 10% back in the business, but as an owner, you have the ability to take up to that 10% on top of your distribution, right? So I'll get into that as well. So, but just know that if you're looking to set up your practice and have that sustainable growth, we'd like to leave a little bit in your operating account, at least 1.5 to 2 times your monthly expenses, so that if anything were to happen, you have kind of a fund of cash on hand for whatever may happen in the future. So phase 1, we look at reducing your variable cost immediately, right? We look at things like dental supplies, negotiate, right? Start negotiating dental supplies. There's Michael Lomaton. He'll be talking about this very intensely later on this afternoon, so that'll be a really good speech. Start shopping around, right? So on top of negotiating with your vendors, start shopping around. Look at these net 32s and these smaller companies out there that you can get knockoff brands that can save you 5 to 10%, off the top, right? So that's kind of our phase 1 round of focus here. Establish budgets. If you guys don't do this, we do this on a quarterly basis. We look at what you're currently spending. and how can we get your overhead down to under 60% or under 55% or under 50, wherever you're at. We start looking at establishing budgets based on your realistic numbers, right? So if you're not doing that currently, I would start establishing your budgets, and like I said, we revisit that every quarter so that we can have what's called a rolling budget, right? So that's what we recommend kind of the beginning phases here. And get the team involved, right? So if we're trying to establish dental supplies and get dental supplies under 4.5%, 5%, whatever, or lab fees or office supplies or whatever, share that budget with the team, right? And say you cannot go over this expenditures each month in dental supplies, right? And give a little buffer. If you're shooting for 5%, set the budget at 4.5%. We know there's a 0.5% in there that if there is some overage, we're still under 5%, right? So get the team involved. Not only will you it'll run itself in a sense, but they have a buy-in process at the time, right? So they feel like they're a part of something bigger than them, right? So it's kind of a psychology trick as well. And then share the results with the team, right? So if you guys come in at 3.5% for the month, have a little celebration, take them out for a lunch or, whatever. Just really celebrate the small wins, because Kevin's going to talk about that. Small numbers equals big numbers. Small wins equals big wins, right? So let's really utilize our team and get them involved to get overhead and get your efficiencies down pat, right? That's all phase 1 stuff. Now, when we graduate to phase 2, which we recently had one of our awesome masterminders do, that was great. Some of you masterminders know Urban Go. Our goal here is to get to 55%. So after we shave all of our variable costs down, right? So we get overhead to 55%. Now, some of you may be under 55% as it is. So phase 1 is really focusing on just cutting where we can, but your phase 2 may be under 50% overhead or under 45% overhead. We see that all the time. So this is just kind of our benchmark here that we shoot for. So phase 2, 55% overhead. So here's a breakdown of the overhead in phase 2. So that instead of 30% operating costs, we shoot for 25% fixed and variable, right? Because we're shaving off the fixed and variable, well, mainly variable. So we're shaving off lab fees, we're shaving off dental supplies, getting our office supplies in budget, that sort of thing. Watching our overtime, right? So that's kind of our first phase into phase 2. The next set of numbers are 30%. That is payroll. So we don't touch payroll just yet, right? Because the only way to drive fixed costs down is increase production and collection, right? So that's kind of our phase 3 talk. But we're still in phase 2. So we're still shaving off. We're still getting our overhead in check where we can. 35% doctor pay, right? Because if we're saving 5% in fixed and variable, that should go to the doctor, right? And then 10% profit. Again, that's a loose term. So, reducing fixed costs, kind of touched on this. The only way to do this is to increase production and collection. You can negotiate your rent or, watch overtime and cut pay, which we never suggest, but you could do that. But the real way that we suggest is increasing production and collection, right? So what are some of the ways that we can do this without adding a ton of expenditures in marketing? Well, we start with internal marketing, internal referral programs, and get the team involved with this as well. So we have a referral program. Some of you may have this, some of you may not, but we offer rewards for every type, for every referral that walks in the door. Some sort of gift is exchanged for that. Now, if you don't have that in place or you want to revamp your referral program, get your team involved and ask them what the patient base would want as an exchange, a gift, because they're dealing with your patients on a much more different level than you guys are, right? You're in their mouths. They're talking more personally with them. So get the team involved and figure out what that reward, what the referral program would look like, right? And then in-house dental plan. This is always, this has kind of been a hot topic with boom clouds out there. You can start your own dental plan, which Mark has, Ambassador. But there are many solutions out there, boom cloud being one of them, that you can start your own in-house dental plan and get that rolling. Especially you fee-for-service guys, right? That's a huge way to close on some treatment, and it's all in-house, right? It's all in-house. Staff incentives. So once we reduce overhead down and we get the variable cost in check, we want to share the savings with the team a little bit, right? So get the staff incentives programs going, because this is another way to drive your production and collection at really essentially a low cost to you. And I'll go through the incentive program and how it works here in a minute. But it is in relatively a low cost to the practice, but it'll immediately have impact once they start tasting that bonus. They're going to become more efficient in their scheduling. They're going to look at ways to bring in new patients through referrals, so on and so forth. So incentive program, and then get the team involved. Set goals based on fixed cost. So now we've got our variable cost down. Let's look at how much. So for instance, if we look at our facility equipment, the target percentage for that is 9%, right? As an expenditure. So if we can look at our net production goal and say, okay, what's it going to take me to get facility equipment under 9%? That's a quick way to say, okay, that's a great budget or a great goal to set. It's realistic, it's obtainable, so on and so forth. So, or it could be payroll or something else. But you use a fixed cost that could be out of check a little bit, and use that to drive your goals. Because a lot of people say, well, what's a realistic goal? That's one of the ways that we set our goals and set up our bonus program, which I'll go through. So phase 3, once we have gone through and got our internal marketing, we have new patients coming in, overhead is reducing because our collections are rising, our overhead is approaching 50% or under. That is the goal in phase 3, 50% or lower, which I would say in our mastermind group we probably have 40 to 45% under 50% overhead at this point. So we have a lot of phase 3 guys out there. But they all started here, guys, phase 1. They started in phase 1 and they've just moved along through the process. So 50% or lower in overhead. Now this is a breakdown of that as well. 25, 25, 40, 10. So similar, the same breakdown as phase 1 and phase 2. 25% fixed and variable, 25% payroll, because again, we're increasing our collections, so that fixed cost will percentage-wise will go down. 40% doctor salaries, and of course 10% profit. Again, loose term, which we'll go over. But that's basically how we move our clients through the phases, phase 1, 2, 3. Again, the overhead is the target, but really it's just the processes that we go through. First process, if your overhead's at 55%, sweet, we want to get you to ultimately 45% or lower, right? So we start with the fixed cost, or variable cost, drive that down through negotiation and shopping around. Then we start in phase 2 with the fixed cost, driving our production and collection, utilizing the team that we have. And ultimately in phase 3, we start looking at ways to really drive production and collection through external marketing efforts and getting creative with our new patient acquisition. Okay, any questions on the phases? Yo.
So can you click back one?
Yeah.
So we've talked about this a couple different ways in a couple different talks. And if you look at phase 3, it's 25, 25, 30, 10. The way that I talk about it most commonly is I keep that third column where he has 40, I keep that at 30%, assuming that we're going to be an associate-driven practice.
Sure.
So if you allocate that that extra 10% in the third column to the profitability, then that would be phase 3 would be 20% profitability.
Sure.
So if you are a multi-practice group, if you are talking about EBITDA, and you're talking about private equity being attracted to you and wanting to buy you at higher multiples, that fourth number needs to be as high as possible.
Sure.
So you wouldn't, if for a single doctor practice that's not talking about wanting the profitability to go up, there's still 50% that's going back to the owner of the practice in this case. But if you are selling, if you're a multi-practice owner or you're trying to increase EBITDA for the sake of attracting private equity, then that needs to be 30, and then the profitability would be an extra 10%, which would be 20%. Same goes back to the doctor in your scenario.
Yep.
If you're a single doctor owner.
Right. Good point. Good point. So it's all about the end game in mind, right? Whatever your end game is. Okay. Yeah. Good point, Mark. Thank you. Okay. So hygiene. Now, we've heard that hygiene is a profit center or the backbone of the practice, all that good stuff, but I'm going to run through the real numbers behind it and how it can impact your practice and how you can truly have that 30% take as an owning doctor, okay? So let's start with that. So we've heard 30% of office production. Now, that's great, but that's not necessary. If you have, even in a single doc practice, if you're doing implants and these big cases, all on fours, what have you, and you're just crushing it in production, it's really hard for hygiene to keep up with that, right? So that's not necessarily a necessity. It's nice, but it's not a necessity in this case. So we look at the production versus pay, and this is actually a new concept as well. It used to be 3 times, but we actually have found that at 3.3 times their pay, that's when they're truly profitable. That means that after you've paid their salaries from their production, you're getting 70% of that back to the practice. Does that make sense? Any questions on that formula? Okay. It makes sense?
No.
It doesn't make sense. Okay. So let's say your hygienist produces $15,000 in the month. We want 70% of that production to come back to the practice after we've paid her salaries. Right? Okay. I'll get more in depth as well, but this is kind of the baseline here. So this is, we've heard 3 times their pay, but we're kind of upping our game a little bit here, and we're shooting for 3.3 because, again, we find that at 70% revenue, that's when they're truly profitable, and I'll explain why. So here's where we start with heavy in the numbers, guys, so stay with me, and I'll back up and see if we have any questions as we go along here, but let's get into a hygiene scenario. So, single doc practice, collecting $100,000 a month, okay? 25% of that comes from hygiene, so that's $25,000. 75% from the doctor. So pretty easy split, 75-25. Hygiene has 70% profitability after salary. So 70% of 25,000 is 17.5. So after you've paid the hygiene their salaries, you're getting $17,500 or $17,500 back to the practice. Everybody follow me? Okay. Assuming overhead is 55%, this is a phase 2 practice, right? Okay. So we have 100,000 collection, 25 coming from hygiene, 75 from the doctor. Hygiene is truly profitable, so you're getting 17.5 back, and overhead, the nut for the month to cover your overhead is $55,000. Okay. Hygiene salaries of $7,500 are paid, so that you can deduct that from overhead because they've justified their salaries with their production. So what's left over after the hygiene has produced and justified their existence, you have $47,500 left over in remaining overhead. Everybody follow me still? Okay. So you have $17,500 from hygiene. So that goes right to your overhead, right? So there's $30,000 remaining in overhead after you've paid from the profit from the hygiene department. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have $30,000 left over. Well, now we have doctor production. So assuming the doctor pays himself 30% of production, which is $22,500, we're going to have $52,500 left over after you take your 30% of your production to support that remaining $30,000 in overhead. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay.
Can you go through that again?
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Start.
Which part?
Just go from the
Okay. All right. All right. All right. So, assuming, okay, did this first slide make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, because the hygiene salaries are paid of $7,500, that's 30% of their production. If there's 70% profitability, then that's going to be their salary,
Okay.
right? Since that's already been taken care of by their production, we can reduce that or deduct that from the overhead when we're looking at it from this perspective,
Okay.
right? So remaining, we have $47,500 left over in overhead that we have to support and cover to get for profitability. So the revenue from hygiene, so they produced $25,000.
Right.
You paid them $7,500.
So then 17.5.
$17,500 is left.
Right.
So $47,500 minus the profit from that department equals $30,000 in remaining overhead, right? So now we have doctor production to take from after you've taken your 30%. So if you truly take 30% of your production collection, that's $22,500 for you as your salary, right? Remaining from your production of $75,000, you have $52,500 left over to support the overhead of the practice.
Oh. Okay.
Of your production,
Right.
not of overall office, just your production. So of that $52,500, that more than supports $30,000 you have left to cover your nut for the month, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this scenario, $52,500 minus $30,000, the overhead, remaining overhead, is $22,500 left over after you've paid overhead, after you've taken your salary as a doctor, after you've paid the hygiene, everything is covered. So this is basically your profit at that point. Now, This is where it can differ, but if you truly take everything home all at once, it's 50% because you're at 22.5, or 45%, excuse me, $45,000 or 45% of office collection.
Are these slides available at the end?
We can have them available,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you follow that or anybody?
I do.
Okay.
But yeah, if
To
you
have it
told
as-
me 3 days from now, yeah.
Sure, okay, all right. Gotcha. Well, we'll do it again on Tuesday.
There you go.
Perfect. All right. Does everybody follow that? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. All right. So that's how you can truly take 30% plus having a strong hygiene department. Single doc. We'll get into an associate scenario later on and how that can really affect your bottom line when you are producing less as a provider. And I'll go through those numbers after that. Okay. So what happens if we have an underperforming hygiene? Right? I love Ace Ventura. We're still looking at production per patient, right? I mean, if our patient flow is good, we're in phase 2, let's start looking at ways we can boost our hygiene production per patient. So we start looking at things like perio percentages, fluoride percentages, sealants, laser, other adjunct services, right? Kevin's probably going to talk about this in his speech later on, but he has a lot of cool ways that we can look at that effortlessly and use that to drive our hygiene department. So these are things you can start looking at if your hygiene department is underperforming, and start sharing that with your hygienist. Look at their production per pay, right, for each hygienist, and say, look, you're at 2.5 times your pay. The mark here is 3.3. So let's collaborate and get your production up so A, you can bonus, which we'll talk about, and B, you're a profitable department for the practice, right? So get that conversation started if it's underperforming. And scheduling, of course, that's always a big thing. Has anybody seen a big drop-off in hygiene lately where holes in the schedule all over the place? Yeah, that's weird. I feel like everyone I talk to, that's happening. Does anybody have any cool tactics that they use for that? For like a hygiene?
Well, I mean, the one tactic is to have an ASAP list. So, I mean, if somebody no-shows, it's hard, but if somebody cancels for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, have your ASAP list so you can try and get somebody in there. And that's working fairly good
Okay.
for us.
So people are responding to that? Do you call them just directly?
I think what we're primarily doing is sending out text messages to everybody on the ASAP list saying we've got an opening at 2.
Okay.
Can you make it?
Great, okay. Does anybody try to identify like times of the week or like any sort of pattern in the drop-off? No? I want to see if we could do that, yeah.
I mean, we're going back 6 months and going, okay, where are all these people? Because they should have scheduled in 6 months, they should be here. Where are they
Recall.
gone? We're also going back and doing a reactivation campaign, referral
Right.
campaigns, up in the marketing. I mean,
Is it working?
it's stabilized now.
Yeah, okay, good.
The first couple, 3 months seemed like there was lots of holes in, and we're looking at the total number of hygiene visits, and they've definitely started to come back up to the normal level that we're used to seeing.
How long did it take for them to respond to that? The hygiene patients coming in?
I don't know that the hygiene patients themselves responded. I mean, it's more a matter of us, like, making sure we're in touch with them.
Gotcha.
Making sure the ones that didn't want to make an appointment at the last visit, we're getting back in touch with them.
Okay.
And they'll sit down and make phone calls, and usually they don't fill the schedule from those phone calls, but they start trickling in. People start going, oh yeah, I probably should get in, and, a week or so later, they'll call us.
Consistency with it, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Just gotta stay on it.
Yeah, okay. Jim, you had something?
Oh, yeah, have the hygienist make their next appointment before they leave the room. Just spend 45 minutes or an hour with that hygienist. You're not gonna turn around and say, oh, I don't value what you did, I don't wanna come in and see you in 3 or 6 months. And I mean, one where I kind of wobble on it is, it's damn expensive to have a hygienist call to confirm appointments or call, but if you have a no-show,
It's better than nothing.
anyway, so, they might as well have them
Okay.
confirm
So the hygienist calling directly. Gotcha.
if necessary.
Right.
Yeah, we use the automatic system, but we've listened to some of the podcasts, we're gonna start implementing this, but calling like maybe 2 days ahead of time
Okay.
for those systems that don't show a confirmed appointment, to make sure you get in touch with that patient. And
Gotcha.
to make sure that you have some kind of communication.
Just identify those who haven't confirmed and just get them on the phone?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Good, I like that.
So we use Weave texting.
Okay.
The problem, at first I thought it was going to be great, but what I've noticed is that in this electronic world now, people cancel through texting. Okay,
Too easy, right?
So we're making it too easy for them to cancel. And we also, when we confirm, what we tell them is, we don't tell them to call back to confirm. We tell them, we'll see you then.
Okay.
Because when you say call back to confirm, that gives them a way out, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Well, that's good.
I know I'm in a more transient area, but what we figured out after looking at it for like the last few months is a lot of our no-shows are actually people who moved. And it's like if you moved, you got someone texting you, I'm not even gonna answer.
Yeah.
So we started, if we don't have a confirmation, ours is 48 hours. If we don't have it, that message is a little more threatening. It's more, if you don't get a hold of us and confirm by tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, your appointment's gone.
And where do you live? That type of thing.
Yeah, where you at?
Where you at? Where do you live?
But by doing that, we will go in the morning and like those 3 that didn't confirm, there's voicemails for them.
Okay.
Oh, I'm coming in. And
Gotcha.
then if they're not, we get them out. Then we have 48 hours essentially to put somebody else in.
Well, you've identified a person who's left the state too, right, or the area.
Well, no,
Or you can.
anyone who hasn't confirmed 48 hours now, because we noticed that so many of our no-shows, such a high percentage, were gone.
Right.
So to combat that, we just said, if you don't confirm, you're out.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
then we just have 2 days to fit somebody else.
Get a little firmer with them then.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
A lot of our
Cool.
windows are closed.
I don't know if it's different, but I've been kids then, so I've been working with all these millennial moms and shit, but we have our systems call, like, we try to force them into a slot when they leave, like the bath, the systems, get them scheduled. If they don't want to schedule, we force them into a spot, we say, hey, it's gonna get packed after school, here's your spot. But then you have this big list of people that don't do it, over time you try to chisel on it. And I don't know, for that age bracket, I don't know what it is, like 27 to 35-ish kind of moms. It's like the 5th call, it's like bingo. I mean, it's like every week we call them, and it seems like you get to the 4th or 5th call, they're not pissed at you. They're just like, they aren't paying any attention. So like the 5th call, like, oh yeah, I forgot to call you back. Let's do it. So it seems like those younger people, they just need hope.
Right. Okay. And you call them, and you're calling them.
We're calling.
Gotcha.
Very old school.
Okay.
So, this is something that, if you think about it, everybody in the room has the same problem, right? So it's actually not really a problem. It's not a dental problem. It's a behavioral problem. We all recognize that, but this is the new reality that we just have to settle into. Our broken appointment rate actually is not that bad. We're at, last month we were at 6.5%, but we've gone up as much as 11. So if I were to take a stab at the average, we're at about 8.5–9% as our broken appointment rate. Now, is there anything that we do differently? No. And actually, if you think about where we're at, it's the worst place to get broken appointments because we're in a tech park. So everybody's really busy with their appointments and their schedules, right? Work comes first. So I don't think it's a problem we can solve. I think it's just a way that we have to figure out where to pivot to and say what direction we go into, either to reincorporate staff to be able to do other high-level activities or what. So we're
Right.
talking about the ASAP list. One thing that we used to do years ago, and we stopped this, was every time there was a hole, I would send out a blast and say, open schedule or open slot, who wants it? And inevitably, there's a 100% fill rate. I mean, if you send out a blast to 1,000 people, somebody's gonna say, I want that list, I need that, right? What happened is that when you start inundating with all that information, people would actually unsubscribe to your list and inadvertently unsubscribe to your recall list. So while I satisfied the need at that moment, I paid for it later on because the recall emails weren't going out, or the text because they were unsubscribing.
Right.
So there wasn't a good way to select for what you wanted to subscribe to. I don't have an answer to that, but you have to think about that as well when you start to basically blast patients to say, let's fill the schedule. So I think this is something we just have to build into the model that we're going to fully expect these cancellations and now figure out what to do with staff in between them.
Good point. That's a good point.
So for us, when we started seeing bigger holes in our schedule, what we started to do is when we would do our 2-week confirmations, we'd say, oh, guess what? We have this opening, it's much sooner. I haven't said, we haven't told anyone, do you want this? It's at the same time that we would look ahead, right? We would look ahead and try and pull forward, appointments forward. That way we could fill this schedule right now, and it gave me 2 weeks to then fill that spot later.
Oh,
It gave
cool.
me some time to
Okay.
fill.
So
Which-
make it more personal and create some urgency.
Yes, kind of create some FOMO, right?
Right,
Fear
yeah.
me out, so.
Yeah, man.
Michael, you were talking about behavior. Has anybody identified, like on their schedule, where there's a time that, you know, if we identify our patients by their behavior, they're going to have, say, if a patient makes an 8 o'clock appointment, they're typically going to show, like in our practice, they're typically going to show up for their 8 o'clock appointment, right? Is there anybody that's like diving into it to where like we know that on our schedules, the 1 o'clock patients are not shown or the 4 o'clock patients are not shown? So like, where are we going to put that person that has that behavior of they've got a cancellation or a last minute no-show? Where are we putting that patient on the hygiene side so that we can be more successful at filling it? Like say if you put them at a 4 o'clock because they've had a failed appointment before, and we haven't confirmed them by that morning, then we're going to have a higher chance of filling that 4 o'clock. Versus like, what's been your tactic for that?
The tactic, so there's certain, obviously with long-term patients, you actually know who they are. You know who the repeat offenders are, right?
Sure.
And so I think the front desk is now at a habit of, if there's a repeat offender, you double book, because you're going to go on that 60% chance that they're actually going to cancel. Analytically, there are ways, and we've talked about this, you know, you could technically pull patients who have canceled, put it, and you know, basically query for that, their number, and either send them a letter to no longer come back, or use that as a pattern to double book. One of the things that we've noticed that we used to be open on 2 weekends a month. We closed that altogether because the cancellation rates on the weekends were astronomical for us. Part of it is because the demographic of the office is in their 30s, right? A lot of new moms, new parents. And so there's kids' activities going on. So when we started to take control, we started to book a demographic that, let's just say, didn't have young kids, right? So I don't want to do age discrimination, but that's the reality of it. So, you know, you got to look at a profile of who's going to be open on the weekend because they don't have soccer games, they don't have, you know, kids to get ready in the morning, and that actually worked out for us. But we ended up just getting rid of weekends altogether because basically we just wanted our weekends back.
Mike?
So what percentage would you say is a good percentage filled at the end of the day for your hygiene schedule?
I mean, 75 to 80%.
One thing I found was I had a hygienist leave, and I decreased my weekly hours by about 18 hours.
For the office or just hygiene?
For hygiene.
Okay.
And so I had like 24 days a week of hygiene. And so I ended up taking 2.5 days off because she left. So I just wanted to see, because we were at about 80%. And sure enough, for about 3 weeks, we're at like 90, 95%. Then a month later, we're at 80%. And so it's like, then I could take off 2 more days, and then I'll be 100%, then I'll be the 80.
Right.
And I think you can do that until you have no more hygiene left. So now, my thing is, I'm just adding hygiene days like crazy. So this week, I've added 3 more hygiene days.
Gotcha.
And you'll go back up to 80. And
Right.
you have to be okay and comfortable with 80%, which includes that broken appointment. Hey, you know, that's okay. And it is. And I think as far as the hours, I've seen no particular, like, this hour gets broken, this one doesn't. It's all about who it is. And generally, the younger the person is, the more they're going to flake on you.
Right.
But we have to be open for those people, and the access and availability, I think, is really important. So looking at hours. So we're also starting at 7, ending at 7 p.m.
Right.
Doing all sorts of things like that. But really, I just think that there's like this magic point, which I've always thought has been about 80%, and it's going to be there no matter what happens.
Sure.
We
Right.
just have to be okay.
Right. One more, and then we gotta move on.
One last thing. So obviously, when we're adjusting on your patients, one of the things that we do is we use local med, but you know, Open Dental now has their own web scheduling tool. So in every correspondence that goes out, there's a link to be able to schedule themselves online. I'm going to try the Open Dental one. So it's built in. So why not? So when you start to, you know, knowing that people are now taking control of their own schedule and choosing when to book and when to not, will give them that ability to book whatever they want. You know, so we get the majority of our online bookings like 11 p.m. at night. Just gives you a sense of
It's true.
where people are going.
I found the local med, it has a better interface than the
Yeah.
Open Dental, so I just switched back to local med from Open Dental.
Yeah.
But people love that.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing. We get these little messages. Yeah, it's 11 o'clock at night, and that's scheduled the next appointment.
Does everybody know what Local Med is? Local Med's an online scheduling company. They can interface with your practice management software and your website,
Website.
so that the patients can schedule their own appointments online.
All right. Good stuff, guys.
Well, this is a little bit different question, but what are you finding is a good percentage of perio? I'm assuming that's perio versus
Pro
fee
fee.
patients.
So our initial goal is 45%. I mean, that's, yeah. Ultimately 60%, but I mean, that's probably a pie in the sky, but 45% is what we shoot for. Yeah, we usually see 12, 15, 20, so. But there are some practices out there who are doing 60, 65% actually I think one of your gals is approaching that right now.
Yeah, like 54 to 59.
Yeah.
How do you handle the insurances if you're a PPO style practice and the insurance is dictating whether they're gonna cover that or not? You're trying to like maximize the benefits, and they say, well, there's not radiographic calculus or this like that. I mean, where the patient still needs it. Like, is it just the act of just going to battle with the insurance company every time that they try to reject or
I mean, I'd probably say, yeah. What do you think? You're not, who's PPO in here that battles that?
You could answer that question because she's a periodontist.
Well, actually, I might have it easier than a lot of general dentists because the perio patients that are referred to me are not the early or early-ish moderate. They're all pretty severe, so we don't really have a lot of rejections, but, I mean, we're looking at 7 and 8 millimeter pockets, not worse than 5.
This is kind of more of it's a one-off question as far as, I've got 2 scratch practices now, and it's about breaking out from obscurity. And I'm in Austin right now, and I know I may get a lot of boos in the room, but I took a DMO, and there you go. From a restorative element, it actually can work really well.
In Texas, do you have a good reimbursement for that, right?
But on the fee schedule itself, anything with hygiene is a loss. So like, I don't have a hygienist. Hygiene just gets in the way. There's no way that you can be, like, it's to the point of where you want your DMO to be able to do the treatment, and then you hope they never come back. Because recall's too expensive. It's all $0. I'm in the process of negotiating. I can get it up to like 20, 30 bucks for a cleaning, but I can't afford hygiene. I'm leveraging out assistants to as much as they can do with coronal polishing, me coming in there for a 6-minute ultrasonic, scaler, and then out.
So is that necessity that you joined?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I have 2 practices. I'm trying to hit 100 new patients a month. I mean, the marketing budget, I can spend about $5,000 a month on marketing. That's not where most of the patients pulled in, and predominantly they're still looking at their insurance.
Right.
So the DMO is an interesting platform because you have a competitive market, and I'd say about 45% of my office is that. And that's an upfront zero cost for marketing there. They're great patients. I mean, they're pulling up in Mercedes, Maseratis, Lexuses. I mean, they're just like, I didn't think I had any concerns.
It's a different niche.
And I don't know how to even ever make hygiene 3.3%, or 3.3 times
Right.
as much.
Well,
so
that's,
it's just, I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever have a hygienist.
I'll have to see your numbers first. and we
Yeah.
can- But yeah, that's,
I don't know if other people are doing that.
I don't know either.
I mean, I've actually learned that from the PDS style. That's why they never had hygiene.
Mm.
They forced their dentists to
Right.
do it because they can't afford hygienists, other than scale. Yeah.
Be an interesting conversation
Yeah.
later on.
So I know a guy that owns 11 practices, and he gives away free hygiene and exams, so he can get all the restorative. So when you say you can't afford a hygienist, in a way, if it's bringing people and keeping them connected, letting you have those exams, then they can pay off really well. It's all return on investment, so you gotta look at the cost you get per
That's a good
exam,
point.
and you may not need 100 new patients every month.
Also, if you're getting capitation for those DMO patients, you might want to allocate that to hygiene production.
But the capitation's only about $1.50 a month. So, I mean, capitation, you're like, let's just get rid of that and renegotiate the fees higher.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the reality of play. So
Yeah.
you can't buck insurance.
Yeah.
Do you accept any insurance at all? Like PPO?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as like for being so new, I mean, there's tons of different DSOs with all just horrible ratings, and all of a sudden you have this crazy one-off with 75 reviews that's a 5-star. It's like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. This guy's a DMO.
Right.
So, I mean, we're the diamond of the derelicts. but it's just one of those deals of what do you do with that recall once it saves? It's an interesting thought. Working
it's
from
kind
our store
of,
development.
well, yeah, for sure. But
Yeah.
I mean, to build up your hygiene, that's going to be really tough. But I'm sure we can get
Yeah.
creative with it.
I
Sure we
don't know.
can.
I don't know if anybody else is doing it, what your thoughts were on it at all. I'm just
It's-
like, I don't think I'll ever.
That's a
have
new
hygienist.
beast for.
I mean, are you offering fluoride and other
Yeah.
out-of-pocket
Yeah,
adjusters?
yeah, so it's $25. So if a hygienist wants $40 an hour, he or she is still gonna be, killing me by over $50 an hour.
I mean, they have labs and have assisted hygiene,
That's what we were doing, yeah, as the assistant, doing that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, we can talk about that more, but let's move along here, guys. All good stuff. Thank you for all your input. That's good stuff, guys. Okay, so let's talk about boosting production without marketing, right? Well, not marketing intensely or external marketing. We talked about this earlier, the staff incentive program. This is our staff incentive program that we've kind of developed over the years. The beauty of this is there's a lot of discretion involved. So once we give this groundwork, you can kind of tweak it and make it your own. But this is how we set up our incentive programs. So the first part of it is we establish a series of 3 checks, right? So earlier we talked about setting a net production goal. So this is where we tie this into the bonus program. So the first check is a net production goal. So at any given month, we look at these checks to see if they qualify for the bonus. The first check, again, net production, if they hit that goal, sweet. Next one is collection, at least 96%, right? At least 96%. That's a second check. They hit those 2, perfect. We look at overhead. Now, again, this is all going to be very specific to your practice. If your overhead is at 55%, I wouldn't suggest setting a threshold at 60%. I'd just set it at 50 or 55, 55, 50% as your overhead threshold, right? So make it realistic to your current situation. But no more than 60% as a threshold because we want to get to ultimately under that percentage in phase 1, right? So if all 3 checks are made, we pay out a bonus of 1 to 2% of a collection for that month into a bonus pool. I've seen many ways of this pool being paid out. Dr. Nicholas has a pretty cool blend where he pays 40% of that pool directly to his managers, and the rest of the 60% is then split amongst the staff based on hours worked. I've seen just an even split of the bonus, and we've seen a split just based on hours worked for everybody. So different ways you can split up that pool, however you think it'd be beneficial in your practice. But that's kind of how that works. Now, that 1 to 2% threshold there, that's based on, again, some discretion. So let's say the net production wasn't met for the month, but they hit the collection goal of, as 120% collection, and overhead was super low, right? Well, we'll say, okay, you hit 2 to 3, we'll pay out 1% bonus this month. That way they're still getting a taste, right? But they know that they have to get all 3 checks to get the ultimate bonus reward.
It's not including hygiene, right?
No, hygiene's separate, and we'll talk about that. This is just staff, front office, back office, okay? And your managers, of course.
This is 2% of the entire collection.
Office collection, correct. Yeah, that's the ultimate goal. Now, again, if they meet some of the goals, that's up to your discretion. We give 1% of office collection to the bonus pool, just so they're getting a taste, right? Because with bonuses, there's a happy medium, right? If you give away too much, it becomes part of their life. They rely on it. They expect it. And conversely, if you're not getting it enough, and it kind of deflates the team. So you gotta find the happy medium there. So we feel like that's a way to kind of combat that. Yes, sir.
One of the things we've talked about is implementation. Are you like saying, okay, we produce 200 or collect the 200, so here's your 2%, or rather you just put in a check and they get the check?
Oh, as far as
Makes sense?
distribution?
Yeah.
Oh, bonus like a W-2 on their paycheck.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're not necessarily saying like these were our numbers.
Oh, I talk about that. Yes, we do.
Okay.
We actually share with the team for sure. Because then, if they don't know what's going on, they're not going to know where to go, where they're at.
Gotcha.
So we actually do share results with them, which goes very, very far in every aspect. Okay, so again, boosting production without marketing. So we're talking about the hygiene incentive now. Okay, so staff is on their own. We just talked about that. Any questions on that? On the staff salaries? The staff incentive program? No? Good. Okay, so hygiene incentive. Again, based on 3.3 times their pay. So what we do is we look at their hourly rate, multiply that by 3.3, and then multiply that by their hours worked in the day, typically 8 hours, 9 hours, whatever that is. And that is their daily goal. Okay? Does everybody follow that? That's their daily goal. So the bonus is calculated daily, and how we do that is, let's say the hygienist's goal is $1,000 for that day. If she produces 1,500, she's going to get between 10 and 20% of that difference. Okay, so again, if she produces 1,500, that's $500 difference. She's going to get, let's say her bonus percentage is 10%. She gets $50 for that day. Okay, does that make sense? Cool. What's that? So 3.3 times their pay, right? Get their hourly wage. Multiply that by hours worked in the day, 8 hours, whatever it is. Whatever that number is, if they produce over that number, you're gonna pay them between 10 and 20% of that difference. Okay? And the cool thing with that is, guys, when it comes time for a raise, you can either raise their hourly rate, which would then increase their daily goal, or you can increase their bonus percentage from 10 to 15 to 20. We've seen up to 30%, which, I mean, at that point, it's all gravy anyway. So it's a good way to negotiate when it comes time for raises, right? And incentivize them a little more. Yes?
Do you take into account adjustments on the back end?
Yes. So are your fee schedules up to date? That's a big piece of this.
Yeah.
If your fee schedules aren't up to date, it's going to be tough because you're going to have gross production for the day, and then you'll have to back out the number at the end of the month. So if fee schedules aren't up to date, you got to get those up to date for this to work properly and make sense to the business. Good question. Thank you. Okay, any questions on the hygiene incentive program? Yep.
So this was a conversation on DSN. If you calculate their bonus daily, and you have a hygienist that goes in and sees their schedule like, oh, I'm not going to hit this for sure. There's the potential, and this hasn't happened to us yet, but I've seen it in other offices where I've been an associate. There's a potential for the hygienist to reschedule and load up a day where they're going to know they're going to bonus, so that they know they're going to hit that mark and then take a percentage off of that.
That's just a day. I mean, that if you have a hygienist who's thinking like that, you probably have the wrong hygienist.
Right? Yeah. So then just got to audit those things. I mean, again, we do it weekly, but I think it's just easier for just doing it every day.
You know, I would think that once they start tasting that bonus, they want to do it every day, not just picking select days and saying, oh man, I want a bonus this Friday. Like, I feel like it's more of a, again, if you have a hygienist that's thinking that way, you probably have the wrong team member, and I would go search somebody who's a little more hungry, right? So, am I off base in saying that, guys, or is that?
I will
okay?
add that staff sometimes sees that, you know, they're 70% through the month, and there's no way that they're going to hit their production goal or collection goal, so they back way off and they start reappointing for the following month. You just have to be aware. And every day at the morning huddle, you have to say, we take one day at a time. Here is what we're going for today. And we're going to try to hit our daily goal. And if you start to get behind, that adds to the next day.
That's a good point.
The morning huddle has to be about same-day treatment. How are we going to get to that daily goal? And you just have to monitor. If you see somebody, you know, padding their schedule or backing off their schedule because they're not going to make the daily goal, then you have to intervene, obviously.
Right.
That just comes down to character and culture in your office, too.
Exactly.
Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, so in this bonus-driven world, assisted hygiene, okay, like in our place we have an assistant breaking things down, setting it up. Most of this, do you suggest that you run an assisted hygiene? Like you have an extra assistant, $10 to $15 an hour, which is part of the hygiene department. Is that what you suggest?
You know, that's practice specific. I mean, what do you think about assisted hygiene, Aaron?
I mean, we do it and been doing it for 15 years.
Yeah.
Like a designated assistant
Mm-hmm.
that's breaking down, setting things up, x-rays.
Yeah, so if you do that, they are included. So instead of, if your hygienist is paid $40 an hour, you're including the assistant into that. So they have to produce, exactly. So they have to justify their assistant as well, because at that point they can probably increase their production from having an assistant.
And you had laser as a procedure code in one of your slides. What's your typical office? How much do they charge for a laser debridement?
Oh man.
It's an average cost.
We charge $125 per quadrant.
I knew it, I was cheaper.
Yeah, I would say between 120 and 150. That's here in Arizona. That's laser is pretty big here. So yeah, 125. That's probably a good range. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on the hygiene before I move on here? No? Good. Okay. And this promotes accountability, which we talked about that as well just a minute ago. Okay, so when we're presenting this to the team, I think, Peter, you had a question on this.
Yes.
We want to create some synergy here, guys. So when we present this to the team, it's not just, hey, guys, we got to hit our marks and then you guys get a bonus. We want to say, okay, guys, we have this net production goal. We want to reach this as a team. Let's find our daily wins each day to get there as a team. And on top of that, we're going to have you guys take control over what you have control over, our ordering, watching your overtime, watching our lab cost, watching our office supplies, right? So we want to empower them by giving them some accountability on the expense side as well, because it all ties together, right? So if you were to mention to them, hey, overhead has to be under 60%, they'd be like, what the hell does that even mean? And they wouldn't even care that much, right? Some may understand that, and that's great, but most wouldn't. Especially your dental assistants and so forth. So what we do is we say, look, if we can control our spending, if you guys can watch your dental supplies, do same day treatment, boost production per day, and if we watch the things that you guys have control over, as a team we're going to bonus. So it's you got to build your staff up around this and take them, make them take ownership of this, and that really is all the difference. If you just throw a bunch of numbers at them, they're not going to A, care, or B, even know why it's even there. So if we explain to them the importance of this and how it's going to impact them, that's how this really, really takes off. And again, once they start tasting that bonus and realize that, their paycheck's increasing, the culture of the office is, their patients are happier, everyone's just happier in general, that's when this thing really takes off. So that's kind of the fluffy side of this. But when you present it to it that way, it really has a strong impact. So.
Quick question.
Yep.
If you're like brand new to all of the mindset you're talking about in your practice, like which do you prefer to set up first, systems or bonus or?
Systems. Got to get your overhead down.
Every day, do that first and then.
So actually that's a good point. If you're in the beginning phases like that, I would say, look, we have this bonus program, but we're not going to roll this out until we get our ops manuals out, our protocol sheets written. So we're going to tie an incentive initially to getting everything systemized, right? So you may see, some traction there. And then once they get that in place, then it's like, sweet, good job, guys. Here's a bonus program. Here's your checks. Here's how we do things. So good question. Okay, I think we're kind of out of time here, guys. Right? So I can talk more about bringing on associates and how that can impact the practice a little later if you guys want to come talk to me in person. But yeah, look at all those numbers. Let me see what I have. Okay, so in closing here, guys, the bottom line is it's all about your overhead and hygiene at this point. Get your overhead down. Obviously, in systemization and operations are key here, right? That's Mark's forte. But from the numbers standpoint, overhead and hygiene, man, that's the backbone of the practice. And if you can get those things in check, you can start taking that 30 to 40% as an owning doctor. Associates, I can talk about that later, but that's a whole new ballgame as well. So what do we do with all this extra money? Good thing we have Alistair and Scott here. Thank you, guys. And Mark takes Pino and I take Cap. So thanks, guys.